All right, so we're joined today by former Walt Disney Imagineer and Smart One's best friend, Jim Sarno, to talk to us today on our first episode of the WDW Connection Show. And Jim has some wonderful connections to CommuniCore, The Land, Journey into Imagination, and many other great masterpieces working at WED's Model Shop. And he's just an all-around nice guy. And so, Jim, we're thrilled to have you on our first show of the WDW Connection Show. And, as we talked about before, it's an honor to have you speak with us today. Jim, just telling us about your journey, growing up in Southern California near Disneyland. That must have been incredibly exciting, seeing that place and going to Disney as a kid, and then your eventual journey to being an Imagineer.
Well, first trip there, I was 5 years old. And like everybody, you fall in love with when you get there. I think for me, it was a little special because my head's grown into my ears. But when I was a kid, I had ears that stuck out. And of course, my nickname was Dumbo. So for me to go to Disneyland was like, Dumbo will be there. And when I got there, I realized they all had big ears and everybody loved them. So as we left with my balloon in hand, I said to my parents, I know this is what I want to do when I get older. So it was kind of a no-brainer. I was teased at school, but at Disneyland, I fit right in. So I loved art, and I was doing art all through my childhood, and went to a local junior college. I was a psych major and an art major. I got my AA, and I started to realize this was all in New York. What I wanted to do was toy design for kids. So the local state college, Cal State Northridge, allowed me to put my own curriculum together. And they said, put it together and we'll see if we want to approve it. So they put me in the child development department under toy design. And so I got my 4-year degree. And then I said, well, it's still all in New York. I'm in California and I want to stay here. So I started thinking of studios. And there was Sesame Street and Disney, of course. And I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and get into Disney. So you don't start out there. Some people do. But for me, it was a road through Sid and Marty Krofft. And it was in Burbank. And they were doing the Donnie and Marie Osmond show, H&R Puffin stuff, and all kinds of kids shows. So I worked there, and my boss was Ken Forsey, and he worked on Haunted Mansion and Country Bear Jamboree. So he was the man who created Teddy Ruxpin, who you can see behind me here. And he was my boss of all people. And of course, as we talked, he was working on Teddy Ruxpin. And he said, Jim, if this thing ever happens, you're coming with me. Well, I thought, what an honor. Well, in the meantime, he had to lay me off, and he knew the people at Disney, and he got me an interview over there. And it was Bob Sewell. I was trying to think of his name earlier, but he was in charge of the model shop before Maggie Elliott was in charge. He interviewed me, wanted me to come on, but they were waiting for the contract to be signed with Tokyo Disney. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to move to Hawaii. And in the meantime, here's my number. And if it happens, call me and I'll come right back. It didn't happen. A year later, I came back and I was looking for a job, and I ended up at Hanna-Barbera. And there I was doing the costumes for all the characters to be in Marineland. We also did the Muppets for Sesame Street Live. And one day in the local newspaper, they said, hiring to make body parts at Mapo. Mapo, it wasn't known, but I did have experience with Hanna-Barbera making body parts. So I went for the interview and got the job, and it was in Mapo working in fiberglass. And if you've ever done that with surfboards or anything, boats, every day, little fibers in your arm, full of glass. It was horrible. But, it was a job in Disney. And my father had taught me, if you want to get in somewhere, if you have to sweep floors, do it. Well, to me, this was sweeping floors. Until one day I wandered over to the model shop during lunch, and I was like a kid going to Disney. There was the model of Epcot, and I was so excited and thought, boy, this is where I belong. And in my interview, Rick Golding, who eventually got me over there, he said, Jim, don't you belong in the model shop? And I thought, well, I didn't see an ad for the model shop. So I took this and I said, every day he would ask me, how are you doing? How are you doing? And I would say, fine, until this one day I said, if he asks me today, I'm going to tell him the truth. So I said, well, Rick, I love my job. And I went over to the model shop. She wants to hire me. This was Maggie Elliott, but she said, I can't because you're in the union. He says, come to my office. We went upstairs. We talked about it. He called her. They talked. And he says, on Monday, you report to the model shop. And he says, but don't tell anybody. So I go down, and while I was in Mapo, I felt like Fred Flintstone. You know, it was clock in, clock out. It was very union. And I couldn't tell my buddies that I'd made that on Monday, you're not going to see me. So Monday morning, I report to the model shop. It was exactly where I was supposed to be. And the first thing Maggie did was she set up an appointment with Rolly Crump and Walt Peregoy. So I said to her, why are you putting me in with these big shots? She says, well, you said you could do this, so I want to see how you do. So I walk in, and of course, Rolly Crump, Walt Peregoy, the nicest guys ever. And they're talking to me about this fountain that Walt had designed. And they said, we want you to build the model of it and then the full size. I thought, this is huge. And of course, I went to Maggie. I said, I can't believe what you've put me into. She says, let's see how you do. And that was it. I started carving the fountain. And as I was doing it, I'm trying to think if I did it in the model or just the full size. I said, you know, they're never going to say that I sculpted this. So I hid my name in 6 feet across one of the panels, just the last name, Sarno. When I went to the opening, I heard the guide person saying to the people that would be the tour guides, we know the artist's name is in here, but we don't know what it is. I thought I could run over and tell them. I said, no, I'm going to keep it my secret. And so it stayed.
Imagineers didn't necessarily get the credit that they deserved. Maggie Elliott said, you know, let's see what you can do. And it looks like they saw what you can do. And you were with the big wigs, and we see you as a big wig as well. And so that's just an incredible story. At the time, you didn't mention it to Walt Peregoy or
I
Raleigh.
didn't tell him. You know, Walt rightfully had quite an ego, and he was a true artist, and a lot of people couldn't work with him, but he and I hit it off, and we did really well. There was a story the day that John Hench and Marty Sklar came to look at the model to approve it to be built to ship to Florida. And they said, we would like all of it, but we don't like the top. And they looked at me and they said, can you do something by tomorrow? And I thought, tomorrow? So I took this horrible green foam back home, and I got in the shower, pulled the curtain, and started to carve the top. And the next day I showed up with this top and they said, perfect, let's go with it. So things like that happened all the time. The Imagination Pavilion, and I sculpted those things where you go through a carousel and then there's arches of butterflies and plants and trees. So Walt would give me an idea. I would design it and then build it out of plexiglass, not fiberglass, but plexiglass and white paper. And then we color lit it with colored gels. So it was all designed in white, and then they lit it when it was full size. And when they had the fountain ready to go, we shipped it to Florida. And Maggie said, well, Jim, the fountain is going and you'll be giving instructions how to do it. I said, well, I should be going there. And she said, well, we can't do that. It's in a few days and we have no flights to get you there. I said, well, I've been on this from the beginning and I really think I should be there. So she said to me, tomorrow morning, you report at Burbank Airport to the mouse. I didn't even know what that was. My sister dropped me off and we see the little private jet with Mickey Mouse on the tail. And when I got in there, it was like a living room, a little bit dated, but very comfortable. I remember them bringing a cart of food around. And then after we were done, they would have a sundae cart Would you like a banana split, hot fudge sundae? I went for everything. I even sat at Walt's desk and wrote postcards. You won't believe where I'm writing this from. So I was like many of the fans. I was like a little kid in the candy store. I think there were 13 of us on the flight. So we land on the tarmac and they have 13 cars lined up. Sally, you're the red car. Jim, you're the blue car. And they gave you your keys. You got in and drove off of the airport. And then they put us up at Fort Wilderness. I guess everybody was at a different place. I was thrilled to be there because they had the canals that you could get in a canoe and ride to Epcot and go to your site. So I was thrilled. I'd put my hard hat on, my drawings, all the parts of the fountain were shipped there. And then it was my job to instruct how this was put together and how it would work. So, of course, the fish panel that had Sarno, I put it right in front so that when you're on the top of the escalators, you look down right at it.
That's great. Project planning is so important in all of this. And you were so proactive in making sure that that was there. And I wish it was still there. So, because I would make a special trip there just to go see the Sarno name engraved in that fountain and as part of the design. And it was an amazing structure. And,
I'll have to send you a close up of that picture.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Please.
Because I
that would be
definitely
great.
got that.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. I talked to a lot of people about some of these things that are in Disney World and parks and really Disney parks worldwide. Something like a fountain. And it means so much to people that have been there, that grew up with it and saw these structures for, every year they went. And to match a product with a face is wonderful. And you've spoken with many people. These things mean so much to the guests.
Since the success with Rolly and Walt and I, the next thing they gave me was redesign the Dumbo ride. Now, how ironic was that with me having that Dumbo name? But all in miniature. And then I went on from there to do the Tinkerbell toy shop and just design how it looked inside. And then they said, we need you to design the perch where Tinkerbell lands from the Matterhorn. Well, I said, okay. And they said, we want you to hide it in the Thunder Mountain area. So I pictured kind of a wood structure like that would hold a water tank and just a place for her to land. They gave me the whole script of what happened when Tinkerbell got up there and what they told her to make a successful flight, that the fans are out there screaming for you. And then she would take off and land into a mattress on the stand that I created for her. It was pretty fun, but there was like a 10-page script on what you talk to Tinkerbell about. So all these magic things that happened. I don't know if they did the same at Disney World, but we had what we called the Gold Coast at WED. And that was the front of the studios where all the hot shots were. All the big names, Mark Davis, Ward Kimball, and all of these guys came back to build Walt's Last Dream. So we were in the hallways with them, talking to them, and they all knew the model shop people because as they designed, they needed somebody to build their imagination. So this guy grabs me and he said, Jim, we need this robot really fast. And I said, okay. And on a napkin from the cafeteria, he sketched out Smart One. And it was just a simple felt pen on a napkin. And I know I have that napkin somewhere, but I haven't found it. And you see Smart One up here. At one of the retro WDW, Jim, who they called Scuba Jim, he had designed a replica of Smart One and gave this to me. It's not the one I made, but it's the one he made. And he actually made one that moved and talked. And I said, well, you don't have to do that. If you give me a model, I'd be thrilled. So this is the one he made for me. But that was kind of an overnight project. I took the napkin. I went to the local hardware store. I bought knobs for a dresser and spheres made of plexiglass. And the next day I took it to the bandsaw, cut it all up, stuck it together. And they said, that's exactly what we wanted.
Amazing skills are showing. You're giving them what they want. Who was the Imagineer who wrote on the napkin?
I thought for years it was Colin Campbell. And
Okay.
I heard later that it was not him. And I was looking up the name before and I could not find the name of the guy.
Smart One is an incredible achievement to see that in CommuniCore. I mean, me as a kid, on this, telephone with the
Yeah.
wire, and
You could talk to a
you
computer.
can talk to a computer. What was showcased, called a showcase to the world, really. I mean, what was in CommuniCore at that time was just things you never saw before. I mean, Futurecom, the age of information, a song about smart telephone. I mean, this is early 1980s.
I know. None of us thought that was coming.
And to have them, everybody having one today, and now
There was
it's like so
design your own
commonplace.
roller coaster.
Oh, I loved that. That was great.
That was fun. I mean, there were so many things that were innovative.
Does the actual robot still exist somewhere? Is it in storage?
It does exist. Somebody bought it on eBay. I don't know who it was, but I found it. It was a computer company that wanted to buy him, and they are in Florida. I contacted them. They were almost going to let me come to see him. And then it was very mysterious. I said, I just want to see him. And I never did. But I think he lives in Orlando. I'm thrilled that Jim made this for me.
That's great. I see him lighting up back there too. That's incredible. So staying on Epcot, and during the fountain installation, you flew out to Orlando on the Mouse. You were based at Fort Wilderness. Well,
yep.
There's the Bonnet Creek waterway from Fort Wilderness. I was looking at a map, and how did you get there?
I think the waterway changed. So I was able to canoe to Epcot, and I don't know where I got off, and walk to work and then canoe back. But we've looked it up, and the guys from Retro tried to find it, and they said, we found an old map and we see the waterway that you took to get there. So it existed, but then changed. And then when I came back, I had been at the Tahunga building sculpting this. And then they brought me into the model shop where I had started at WED, and they put me right next to Harriet Burns. When she passed away, her daughter wrote a book, and all of us wrote stories. I think I have it right here. Stories of our time with Harriet in the model shop. And she and I just hit it off. We were good friends, and she'd been in the model shop since the beginning. So she had stories about everyone and everything, and she knew everybody. So Mark Davis would come over to talk to her. Leota Toombs, she was her good friend. And Blaine Gibson, he was the sculptor of everything. Harriet was married, Blaine was married, and they were just good friends. Well, later in life, Harriet's husband passed away, Blaine's wife passed away, and the two of them became a couple. And these friendships were amazing. I mean, these were the youngest people I ever met. They were twice my age, and they were so much fun. Walt Disney himself loved her. And whenever he would come in the shop, they would have a code. They'd say, Yellow Shoes is coming, because I guess he wore some yellow shoes to golf or something. And the respect they all had for him. And she had a bird that Walt Disney had given her, a mynah bird. And he gave her the cage, and he wanted her to see this bird to design the tiki room. So every time he came in, they were afraid, because the mynah bird was copying their jokes and their humor, which was a little off color. So they were worried every time he came in, what is Joker going to say to Walt Disney? I guess they always slid by, but that cage was always on her desk. And when Joker died, she took one of the tiki birds, sprayed it black, and stuffed it in the cage. So when I went to her home after she passed, in her studio was the cage. And it just got me, because that was always on her desk. So the family gave me the cage with the stuffed mynah bird in it. They said, Jim, we saw how you felt when you saw that. And she would make fun of me collecting all the things that they would give us. And there were parts and pieces. And when people would go to Disneyland and they would redo something, or they had something from the model, like this little lantern, you see that? And she used to tell me stories that she was making stained glass for the boat cruise, for the little houses. And Walt Disney would come over and have her show him how she was making these things. And so she had these and she'd give them to me. She says, I don't want all this stuff, Jim. You take it. One time they took the paddle wheels for there's 3 cottages. I don't know if it's Wind in the Willows or some story that Disney used. Well, they were redoing it all in fiberglass. So they brought the original pieces back to Harriet. And she was so polite and kind, and she thanked them. And when they left, she goes, Jim, what do I want with this? I said, that's original Disneyland. That's very exciting. Nobody else has this. She goes, you take it home. I don't want it. When I went to her house to take care of things after she passed, she had so much stuff and it was all collected. And I laughed and thought, Harriet, you made fun of me, but you were collecting it all the time too.
Harriet was a collector as well. It's one of those things where when you're in that Disney world,
there's so much stuff.
There's so much stuff. It's just so nice to relive those memories.
Walt Peregoy, who I don't know how many drawings he did in a day, but he was prolific. And he gave me so many of his drawings. Many of them I bought too, because at the end of his life, he was living off of his own art. But some of it was Disney stuff, and then many pieces were his own art. And I just know, as close as I was to him, I had to have a collection of his work.
When I think of murals in Walt Peregoy, I think of Epcot Center. I feel like murals of anything are always engraved in our brain. And It's something that we remember, like that wavy design, so unique to either imagination or the land.
Walt Disney appreciated his style, because he did the backgrounds for 101 Dalmatians, worked on Sleeping Beauty. He did so many things that were unique to him. And he was very frustrated because here he was, a true artist working in a commercial capacity that was pretty frustrating for him. But till the day he passed away, he was always doing his own art. Here's a story of when Diane Disney opened the Family Museum up in San Francisco. So Pam Burns Claire, who is Harriet's daughter, invited me to the opening. So I went there and sat right next to Diane Disney. And we're watching the film, and I can't believe this story. And I had the book that she just wrote about her time with her dad. And she wrote, to Jim, I envy you. Diane Disney. I said, Diane, why do you envy me? She goes, every time my dad brought me to the studio, I wanted to sit next to Harriet Burns and work on the models. And she said, and you got to do it, and I didn't. You were Walt Disney's daughter, and you envy me. But what she was saying was, I envied what you got to do. So here she was, even though she was his daughter, he wasn't going to let her be there in the shop. But he himself loved going and working with Harriet because she was so much fun. And she knew so much about how to build models.
We can probably talk for hours and hours and hours about Harriet Burns, and maybe we'll have the chance to do that. What's one of your favorite stories with Harriet Burns?
There's so many favorites, but my favorite was going to her house in Montecito. She and Bones, her husband, had just built a home. In fact, they had let me stay there before they even lived in it. And so that's how kind she was. But she invited me over. She says, Jim, I got a new grand piano. I want you to come over. I'm going to play it for you. So I'm sitting on the couch, and my mother was a piano player, so I really enjoyed piano. And Harriet sits down, and she is just all over the keyboard. And it is like Carnegie Hall. I mean, she could have been a professional piano player. And she comes over while the music's going with a tray of appetizers. Jim, would you like anything? And the piano's still playing. I said, Harriet. And she just cracked up. She'd bought a player piano, and she wanted to play this trick on me where she was going to serve the appetizers while the piano's still playing. But she was, so fun and did anything to make you laugh. So, and that was the time we both just rolled because it was pretty funny. Walt Peregoy was my other good friend. And here these two people are, I think I was 27. They were in their 50s. We had the best time ever. Oh, there was a story of Fred Jurger, the right-hand man to Walt Disney for building Disneyland. And he was very private, and he had a home in Pacoima, which is probably 5-10 miles from the studios. And he invited Walt to come for lunch to see this room that he had built where Walt Peregoy's paintings were in the wall. And he had them lit, and he had his whole collection in there. He wanted to show Walt what he had done because they were very good friends. So Walt says, Jim, I want you to go with me. I said, but did you check with Fred? He goes, yeah, he said you can come. So I told my boss, Maggie Elliott, I'd been invited to Fred Jurger's for lunch. She goes, nobody ever goes to Fred's house. You have to go and stay as long as you want. So I bought a couple bottles of champagne, met them there, and talk about a memorable, like, I just sat there like, why am I here? How did I end up here? And it must have gone on for 2-3 hours. We drank all the champagne. I came back and Maggie says, you have to come in and tell me everything about your visit. So I did. And that's one of those times where like, how did this happen? Let alone Harriet Burns and the mouse and all that happened. It was just incredible timing and doing my best.
From the stories you're telling and your experience, you were so fortunate to have all this work out, getting in the model shop. It's a dream come true, going to Disneyland as a kid and then eventually working at Disney in the model shop where you wanted to be and meeting Harriet Burns, Blaine Gibson, Raleigh, amazing people that were very close with Walt. And I can see why you have so many amazing stories, Jim.
Well, I'll tell you, one day at Walt's house, I see this book. Have you seen this, Walt's People? So it's on his shelf and he's in it. And I said, Walt, do you know what that means to be in that encyclopedia of who's who at Disney? And he didn't make much of it, but I was very impressed. And a little thought in the back of my head was, wow, to be in that book, that would be something else. And then a friend of mine, Julie Swenson, who's good friends with Didier Guez, who does these books, told him about these stories I have. So he added me in this volume. And I couldn't believe it. He gave me a whole chapter. And look at this, to see your name with your birth date and not your
Amazing.
So being in the right place at the right time or knowing the right people or whatever it is, life just came together and gave me more things that I was shocked. Like, how did this happen?
Been around Walt Peregoy a lot. What was
Yeah.
he like? I mean, when you hung out with him socially,
Took his work very, very serious. Now, he and I had a lot of good laughs because we joke with each other, but he was a very dedicated artist who took his work so serious that he was easily offended if somebody didn't like something or they wanted something changed. He couldn't believe they would change. He was that passionate about his work.
Walt being that perfectionist, and people who were around
Yes.
Walt Disney, Walt Peregoy probably had that same mindset of like, this is your work, stand by it and make it perfect. And he saw it as perfect. And we've seen his work, pretty darn perfect.
Yeah. And they are extremely dedicated. So their families suffer a bit because they're so engrossed in their work that the family just has to find a way to be part of them. So, even after I left, the Teddy Ruxpin story was because Ken called me and said, I hear you're not working there anymore. Come and work with me. So I sculpted the characters and he wanted me to take over the model shop and it didn't work out. We had a few words. Later on, I saw him at a party and we talked it out. We forgave each other. All was good. And then now there's still reunions and parties and I'm still doing work. I've gotten into glass. I don't know if you've heard of glass fusing, but it's pieces like this. So I'm having a good time. And then I lived up in Monterey for quite a while, but I've moved to Santa Barbara. And two of my model shop friends, Alex Scribner and Joe Rohde, both live here. So we've gotten together a few times and I think, well, here we go again. We're back together after 40 years and Joe and I are becoming good friends and Alec and I always have been. And it just keeps going on. And on Pandora with the Flight of the Dragons, I told him, I said, Joe, that one is a new experience where I've never felt that kind of feeling ever. And he came up with that. You know, a little kid who goes to Disneyland and then dreams of what many, many people dream of doing. And then still now, years later, having these friends that are so creative. I couldn't ask for a better life.
Great experience and experiences in your life that you can talk about and be part of that world. That's just remarkable.
There was a story when I was given the fountain to do. Blaine was a little upset, and he was a very even-keeled person. But he came to Maggie and he said, why do you have a sculpture piece going on in the model shop with Jim? He says, that should be in my department. And I was terrified thinking, oh my God, they want me to go to the sculpture. And he said, you know what, Jim, you can stay here in the model shop, but I would like to come and help you do this. So he would stand there with me and show me how to sculpt the clay, loan me tools. He even gave me a couple of his tools. And when I saw him years later, I had him sign them to me. I mean, again, what a wonderful place to be. And while I was there, I remember if anybody asked me to do anything, oh, of course I can do that. And then you just did it because you just don't say no. And that's a good idea for living, you know, just always go for it.
Did you also know George McGinnis as well?
George McGinnis. Well, remember when you asked me about
Smart
One?
Was he involved with Smart One as well? Because
Well,
he did Horizon, Space Mountain. And he's the one who wrote on the napkin Smart One and said,
yeah,
here, do this, sculpt that.
they didn't even have the name. He just had a Sharpie and he did these ovals, and that's what got us started. I called him Robbie the Robot, and they named him Smart One later. But you were asking something about George McGinnis, if I had any interaction with him, I guess.
Yeah, because he always comes to mind when I think of Horizons and Space Mountain, and obviously
Thank you for bringing
Epcot
his
Center.
name up. And I think there were times when I was there that I said, boy, how many people wish they were in this position? And I just was so blessed and fortunate to be where I was. And it keeps going on.
Did you ever have the opportunity to meet Walt Disney and Roy Disney?
No, never did. I mean, you see pictures of him signing books and things, but my sister had found a tattered book in a thrift shop and it had Walt Disney's signature on it in crayon. And I said, Jane, you've got to sell me that book. You know, I worked there. She goes, no, no, no. I said, well, I challenge you. I'm going to find something. So I was living in Burbank. I went to this estate sale and it was Grace Harlow. And I saw these books and I said, how much are these books? They said 25 cents. I saw little Jiminy Cricket on the back of the cover. I pulled it out, opened it up. It was an envelope to Grace Harlow, Victory Through Air Power from World War II. It was a Christmas card. And then I turned the page and there was Walt Disney's signature. And I took it to the studio, and the guy at the time who was in the archives, Dave, I said, Dave, what do you think of this? He goes, that's the real thing. He said, a lot of people signed his name, but you got Walt Disney's signature in there. 25 cents. But before I brought it to him, and he actually typed up a letter and signed it for me to authenticize that it was Walt Disney's signature. Oh, when I spoke at Harriet Burns' funeral, Marty Sklar was speaking, and he said to me, Jim, he says, I really like your voice. He said, have you done any voiceover? I said, no. He says, I want you to contact this guy. I think we could use you as the voice in the park. I went a few times. It never happened. But the guy said to me, he says, hey, if Marty Sklar sent you, we need to hear you. And so I did a demo and all that, but it didn't happen.
These stories are incredible. Career is incredible. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but I just ask you one more question. What is your, and even past or present, what is your all-time favorite attraction?
Well, there's, the favorite as a child was Peter Pan. I love that. But I would have to say present day is Pandora. because to have an experience that your body has never felt before, that's pretty incredible. And my buddy designed the whole thing. So I would have to say that's it. And I've been to a few of the parks and they're all magical. You go in there, and if you can just suspend your imagination and let yourself be there, it's pretty incredible. I wish it wasn't as expensive as it is, because it doesn't allow people to go like they used to go.
It was an incredible time. And I actually first went to Disneyland. You're going to be surprised to hear this. And I first went last year to Disneyland. My first time there, I just walked down Main Street and I was just like, Walt walked this street.
I know.
And Jim Sarno walked down this street too.
and Harriet has a window on that street.
Yeah. And so I just started thinking about all the people that have walked down this street.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a main street that has a lot of history. And, it was an amazing time, and I cannot wait to get back.
Well, when you do, let me know. I can drive out there. It's not that far.
Oh, absolutely, Jim. Absolutely.
It's
looking
pretty
forward
wonderful.
to it.
And as grand as all the other parks are, there's something about the original where Walt decided how all going to be.
Exactly.
It's pretty wonderful.
Well, Jim, I don't want to take up any more of your time. This is absolutely incredible. And you always have a seat here at WDW Connection. Great. And so you're always welcome back anytime you want to have another discussion about more of your stories and experiences. You let me know, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thanks for sharing all of your amazing stories.
So we'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Jim, have a magical day. There we go.
I will. Thank you very much, Mike.